and the smell of the
Check out the
smoke.
other videos in this series.
They have struck him down. The son of Duffy that wheeling.
This is the first song released on an album that I gave a 10 out of 10 to. The song, not the album. That's why I'm starting here. The two 10 out of 10s I've given to a song before this were to Old Man River in 1927, which is from the musical Showboat, and Reminiscing in Tempo by Duke Ellington, which was a double single. And of course, many classical pieces. This is one of the greatest and most influential poems of all time, performed with a jazz ensemble. There would be no Allen Ginsberg complaining about weed or whatever without this one, and by proxy, probably no Bob Dylan, and so no music. Rexroth has 30 years of great poetry before this, and this is probably one of his biggest accomplishments. This movement might be the best piece of classical music from the 50s. There's so much character and physicality to this piece. The dissonant crescendo at the beginning could be on the best symphony of all time. That becomes this hysterical narrative passage involving every part of the orchestra, and the cello solo that concludes the piece surveys the whole ritual like a ghost.
The mists of chaos had spent much trouble trying to come in contact with chaos himself.
I don't know if I'm allowed to include this. Indeterminacy is one piece, just split into 4 sides on its original vinyl release. Usually I wouldn't let technological limitations affect my perception of the structure of a composition, but with John Cage, I think it's more forgivable to let technological limitations affect my perception of the structure of a composition because it's John Cage. The idea of this piece is that 90 text fragments written by Cage are performed in no particular order over David Tudor's even more random tape inventions. However, whether by accident or secretly intentionally, this fourth part feels very much like a subtle climax. This is the explosive finale of Parch's opera Revelation in the Courthouse Park, and it's best experienced in that context and with some understanding of the narrative, because that's the best way to elicit its demented, morbid flavor. This is really next level as far as third stream music in the early 60s. I would highly doubt you can find a piece operating at such an extreme of both jazz and classical experimentation before this, although I'll shout out Jazz Ed Jazz by André Hodier, which was apparently recorded in 1952? Oh my god, that would have easily made the jazz video if I knew that. Outside of Ellington, there has never been a jazz composition with this much grandeur before this. The scale of not just this piece, but the entire 2 hours of Epitaph signaled the importance of what Mingus was doing for the medium. Black Saint and the Sinner Lady's Closer. You can basically consider this a new high watermark for music as a whole, if we once again consciously ignore the existence of the entire institution of classical music. Kulthum had 4 million people attend her funeral in 1975. I'm sure that this was probably the best song most of them had ever heard, because it would probably be the best song that your dad has ever heard, and he's from 2026 and has the internet. This is the first masterpiece of rock music, pretty much the biggest middle finger possible to whatever combination of factors Dylan manifested as this poor homeless woman while he was stoned at the typewriter.
Waiting in line for that train.
Blonde on Blonde positions Bob as the centerpiece of basically a theatrical narrative that culminates in this 11-minute apology song for his wife that is probably the greatest love song ever made. I say probably only because lots of things are love songs when you think about it for long enough. The Battle of Hampton Roads is a love song. 1967, you can go for a lot of songs. A lot of songs. But this is basically the shape of rock to come. There might not be a single subsequent canonical rock album that doesn't trace back to this in some way. The end is the point at which writing, performance, and music really form this new visceral whole that, I'm sorry, classical music just does not have under its belt. And even something like Heroin by the Velvet Underground is still somewhat operating in that old mode. This is really a work of omni music, jazz, classical, rock, theater, electronic, that I would never have expected to find in the 1960s. This is from one of my top 10 albums of all time, and I would call this a top 10 song of all time as well. I love this, man. I love all this sound collage and imagery being put solely toward the goal of getting in our heads as listeners. My jaw was completely on the floor, rolling down the stairs like a cartoon wolf when I finished this. And then in 1970, there's also Brain Ticket by Brain Ticket, but... This song was in the oven for a few years, which is crazy because even a month before this came out, there was nothing like it. And it is the masterpiece of rock music, In terms of what came prior, this has all of the truest and most powerful elements of the End's purported examination of the heart of man through this psychological labyrinth, and all of the literalness and drama of Bob Dylan's song apologizing for his infidelity. I will hold this up as the greatest piece of music ever until further notice. Hopefully this is an obvious case of don't just listen to the piece, listen to the whole work. It's such an involving composition, knowing that as literally as possible he's putting his entire life on display at the same time as he's playing this very Russian joke about himself as the main character of his work dissolving into classical music.
What last time was, does it?
2 years ago, I put this right behind the last entry as number 2 on a list of the best songs of all time that need their release's context. And someone still listened to it on its own and was like, I don't get it, it's just a big drone half of the time. So I cannot stress this enough. Listen to Escalator Over the Hill. This is its conclusion, which reprises the entire cast and all of the motifs of the opera and sets up its grand recircular structure. This is John Fahey's magnum opus, a solo guitar piece which lasts 23 minutes. It's basically to folk what The Black Saint and the Sinner Ladies entry was to jazz, just an orchestra of pure life. Robert Wyatt was the vocalist for Soft Machine, and this is the exposition for his concept album resolving a lot of the conflicts latent in Moon and June. It's a very direct admission of the way his alcoholism has affected his life and the lives of those he loves for the worse. But it comes from a time in his life of clarity and creative renaissance, where the worst has already given way to an unheard of beauty. It's so good! This song is the kind of thing that makes people join cults because it confrontationally reaches for your untouched and vulnerable heart with Bill Clinton has this universal empathy. And he also literally starts babbling and weeping like a child on this song. One of the most emotionally powerful songs ever written. Kathy Acker wrote the lyrics to this one, and it's gotta be her best work. This metaphysical modern myth where Patrice Magnet sings about willfully being killed by God's love. It's an attempt to encapsulate the sexual experience of a woman at as high an extreme as possible, and so naturally, it's also a primitive form of the overwhelming compositions of totalism we'll see more of in 1981 and 1996. This is a level of guitar composition that's usually reserved for instrumental pieces like a Fahey or a Robbie Basho. This is actually the only time I can think of where the guitar is used so completely in a piece that's, by all accounts, built around a poetic text. A poetic text as insane as its performance and composition.
Essence to warmth, to my body and its rhythms, and back again.
A Letter from Home About Sound and Consciousness, also known as Out of the Blue, is a long, beautiful, spoken word composition framing a text written by Blue Jean as though it was a letter from a friend to himself. And it's the crown jewel of the 5 years when he was making real music and it was all absolutely perfect.
Standing naked in his back of the woods, like a sack.
In a year where punk was really dominating for the first time, Public Image Limited, who were led by Johnny Rotten, were almost playing out the conclusion of the whole genre with this repetitive, slow riff. It sounds like Slint, is basically what I'm saying. They're inventing this existentially imposing sound of emptiness and giving a stifled and more realistic version of the punk movement where there's no real catharsis, and that's the real form of the social nightmare the whole movement was trying to resolve in the first place.
She was a survivor through no choice of her.
Talk 1 is an electronic spoken word track narrating the interior monologue of a woman confronting her own life. It's the opener and thesis statement of daytime viewing, which is probably the most intimate and analytical piece of feminist music of this time period. It's also the only electronic composition in this video and might be the best ever. Glenn Branca is the composer as far as merging low culture with high culture, because this is both no wave, which was a bunch of angry kids playing their instruments as poorly as possible, and classical music. In fact, the structure of this piece is the growth from the former to something resembling the latter. John Cage hated this development, although he might have hated the classical part more than the no wave part, or he might have just been old.
The self speaks only to the self. The interchange of light suffices.
The bar is mostly the interior and exterior monologue of bartender Rodney in the midst of Perfect Lives, a spoken word opera for television, which itself is symbolically featured in this song as a VHS tape of boogie woogie lessons. The song begins and ends with the same words that poetically describe the conditions that led to the possibility of the very television episode you're viewing, and climaxes with multiple revelations about the nature of the self and the place of God in the universe. In the TV show, Blue Jean Tyranny plays the greatest piano player in the world, and he also is, and sets the whole thing to one of the most beautiful, dynamic, and powerful instrumental performances in music. On top of that, Peter Gordon from earlier is the producer, and Jacqueline Humbert from earlier did the costumes.
Just leave me alone.
There are 4 different songs on this album that I could have picked, but this is the last of the 4 and bears a lot of the weight and mystery of the album, especially since the album is structured as a descent into isolation and madness. That crescendo definitely peaks with Sally 4, but the aftermath here is so evocative and full of interpretive potential and subversion that it feels like the vessel into which the entire progression is poured.
Move on, if you can know where you're going.
It's hard to pick the best song off of Sunday in the Park with George because it's the greatest musical and best theatrical work of all time, but since I don't usually let album context affect my lists, and in this case I'll pick Move On, which is the climax of the whole thing, and where the perfection really comes together. I don't want to get too much more specific because it would only make sense with the context of the work.
Do you have to classify everything starting with...
Elliott Smith was like 15 or 16 when he made this song. I love ambitious juvenilia. I won't give a pretext of this containing his whole career in it or anything. It's just his most beautiful song and a startlingly empathetic statement for this early in his career.
A loose affiliation of millionaires and billionaires and baby. These are the days.
Paul Simon was mega washed by 1985, and that provided all the inspiration for Graceland, an album recounting the search for himself after his divorce. He famously went to South Africa and collaborated with a bunch of musicians there. The greatest fruit of this renaissance for him was the intro to the album, this one, which is an outpouring of love and wonder in the wake of the experience. It runs the gamut from exposure to war-torn poverty, to technological wonder, to schizophrenic speculation on conspiracy theories and lasers in the jungle. It's up there with Sound of Silence as his songwriting masterpiece. This is proof that Kate Bush could have made the list if she made a 10-minute song, and if she made a real concept album instead of half of one. And also, let's make her Canadian for good measure.
It's no spoken word. It's called scratch.
This is the masterpiece of 20th century hip-hop, an avant-garde sound collage piece built around this lecture on the spiritual significance of the MC and the DJ. The feeling of authority in the song, despite the absurdity and insanity of the lecture, comes from how serious the composition is. There's nothing like it in the genre, even to this day, and that reshapes our understanding of the thing into something far beyond us, because it was. Someone is a song named after its main character, a sort of embodiment of the person that this perfect music is trying to reach. This whole album is like a warm disillusionment with the whole revolutionary spirit of punk and emo turned into this progressive masterpiece. This is the closer, which reaches a totally sincere and beautiful conclusion.
No! You make me hate myself!
Here's a song with a beautiful message about how to unsuccessfully cope with the natural beauty of infidelity. So much so that eventually later on the album you plot the murder of your significant other, but that's neither here nor there. This is here for being this multi-phase epic about the psychological gravity and immediate reaction to the realization, setting the perfect stage and forming the heart of one of the greatest satires in music history. After being treated to a rendition of the Star-Spangled Banner, you may hear this song, the slowest thing ever recorded, a trudge through a psychology that gets increasingly more populated with the literal description of events like some force that pulls the narrator into the bottom of the sea, a passage during which every couplet takes over 30 seconds to complete. In the second half of the song, all that sinking is undone by 6 minutes where the music gives a soaring effect, equal and opposite to that descent. Up to this point, this is really the high watermark of songwriting as a whole. The retelling of every step of this doomed relationship with just enough self-awareness for the lyrics to become this sort of bitter self-torture, but not enough to escape. Written in 1989, this version of Strawberry Hill transforms the abstract theatrical protest of a child against his upbringing into an anthem of the self against the entire history of humanity. That's the scale of this performance and composition, especially in the context of the psychological drama of Red House Painters, the greatest rock album of all time.
There too, I just expected to.
The structure of Geek the Girl is a sort of descent from birth into the lowest point of invalidation and hatred, which begins a slow and twisted reassumption of identity and meaning in its back half, with A Guy Like You as the emotionally devastating linchpin. A last real grasp at connection and resolution to the sheer weight of impossible reconciliation that the world as described demands, in the form of a hopeless conversation between lovers. Rebecca Moore wrote a surreal play about her boyfriend Jeff Buckley called The Hinger, and another play about struggling to create an opera in the wake of her father's death called Larynx Chalet, and from them drew up an album where this song bridges the dark fantasy of their characters and mythos to her real-life context. All of that has breathing room in this song as you linger in the darkness of the moment and the weight of the inspiration sets in. David Byrne and many other heroes of Michael Rouse sat and watched Dennis Cleveland, his talk show opera, and got to experience the revelation that was Soul Train, which is an ominous choral piece at its core, but more identifiable with hip-hop and rock in its rhythmic dimension, that bathes in this shadowy dissonance completely at odds with and stripping the facade from the talk show setting as it burrows into the heart of our culture and identifies the many manifestations of the beyond in our lives. Perfect From Now On is one of the most mature statements of the decade by an indie band. Obviously, there are a couple that have a little more going for them in that regard, but March's obsession with all of these metaphysical dynamics that humanity are subject to all come hurtling toward this grand final statement with some of the most nuclear truths ever put on wax.
Soft, silly music is meaningful, man.
As a pure feat of songwriting, there's nothing that held a candle to the nightmare of this song, where Jeff Mangum was deliberately searching for the darkest and most misguided outlooks in the human experience to find a sort of one true depression for the climax of his eternal masterpiece In the Aeroplane Over the Sea. Two climaxes to lo-fi folk concept albums about overcoming depression in a row? Yes. Burning a new leaf, man. The point on unhappiness where Whitney, at the brink of all loss of hope, finds an unconditional love that empowers him into an outlook completely opposite to where he begins the album. But the whole way there is met with a skepticism that you can feel bursting at its seams as the song meets its crescendo. Alvin Rowe concisely tells a story of Alvin Rowe, whose life passes by in the song very quickly and poetically from the beauty and wonder of childhood into the disillusionment of adulthood along this musical progression through catharsis and sentimentality and confusion that plays with pace and magnitude and dissonance like you would have to in order to impress the scale of the whole thing. It's an interesting comparison, but it reminds me of the emotional connection that Alan Vega had to the character Frankie Teardrop, whose story is a lot more concise. In the midst of an ocean of immature Dadaist avant-prog hell, this song is an oasis of beauty and an earnest attempt at some transcendent ritual that still holds its connection to the nightmare for an impression a lot more jarring than most songs on this list. I always thought I was gonna hate Bright Eyes. Well, I did hate Bright Eyes, but then I heard this album, which is among the more obvious masterpieces I've ever heard, especially with where I was already at with music. And this closer is what really sells the whole thing, where Conor Oberst just explodes from out of his wimpy shell and gives his meager all to the punk tradition which all this indie folk came from. Definitely would interact interestingly with The Hated. Mark Kozelek from Red House Painters was known to be a very melancholy young man, but when he formed Sun Kil Moon, he came out of the gate with one of these masterpieces of optimistic folk music, and the background and impetus for that is described by this song, which invokes the death of the boxer Kim Duk-koo as a metaphor to contextualize an unfulfilled life within death. The song goes on for a long time just basking in as much beauty as it's possible for the musicians to create. It's also possible that the song is a metaphor for what Mark lost when his friend Katie passed away, and how that affected his life. This is a beautiful song.
Arrogant, can y'all blame them? It was straight embarrassing how y'all played them last year.
Kanye. Well, this is the closer to his debut album and features a long outro where he describes all the hurdles he had to overcome to actually get the album produced and put out on a label. Of course, that does a lot to expand a work that was already pushing hip-hop into a new era of artistry. This is also probably the best exposition for Kanye's production abilities, as he's turned both that and his rapping up to the next level. With a sample flip of Jay-Z, and this whole outro kept compositionally engaging the whole time. This is a composition designed for performers in the adjacent room to the microphone, so everything you hear is through a wall, and the composition is not only designed around the physical obstacle that provides, but the metaphorical obstacle, because the effect isn't just that we experience our relationship to music on a much more physical level than usual, it's that we only experience a ghostly modicum of whatever is being unleashed over there, and a new territory for composition is discovered in the ambiguous, that resembles our dynamic with evasive eternal truths.
Lay it down, nice and slow.
The centerpiece to East, Only Skin is an epic literary chronicle of an abusive relationship soundtracked by an orchestral composition probably more sophisticated than anything else in folk music. Top 5 song of all time. Sweden's Pride and Joy, Nikolai Dungar, gave his autobiographical Taste of Raw trilogy an absolutely ridiculous conclusion where avant-garde classical music meets the extreme end of rock, folk, and jazz to revel in all of the insane outer reaches of human expression for 40 minutes. The concept of secular works is that it kind of recounts the psychology of Charlie Looker, who also made Skolek's Throne Shame of Heaven, pursuing an outsider life, dissatisfied with a normal way of being, and this song gives that pursuit an unexpected turn for the darker, further than you would expect that drive to take anyone, since it involves a sort of transcendent suicide, and he's writing these lyrics as a ghost, still taunting humanity from the grave. Stumps is a song about moving on. It's written as a memory, very densely, with obscure allusions and symbolism drawn from Whitney's own life, on top of much intricate imagery, but it seems to bridge, in its short runtime, very opposite feelings, similar to a song like Burning a New Leaf, but even more revelatory in spirit. MBDTF, as we kids call it, is a concept album detailing the hypothetical rise and fall and remains of the career of the greatest rapper of all time, like a modern Citizen Kane, and this is the Ozymandias moment, where the world really comes crashing down and there's nothing left for the protagonist, and it's very much their own fault. The emptiness and loneliness of the moment is what Kanye tries to convey, or in a way tries not to convey, with the outro where his vocals are processed out of existence. The last song Lou Reed ever made is a circular moment for his career, and very self-aware about its position, with a title that very straightforwardly invokes the cycle of which he is a part. In the context of Lulu, this is the very ending, and after the storm of insanity and descent into abstraction of identity, you re-emerge into this song where the character has been completely shed of all its universal human suffering, and is now just Lou Reed basically talking to his abusive dead father in an almost understanding tone. I don't know if anyone has ended their career on a stronger note than this.
Slip from my toes, what time I scribble the walls.
This song is about a deformed little comedian who escapes via flush from the toilet that is Attila the Hun's palace, and pursues spiritual fulfillment by leaping from different heights and promontories, literal and symbolic, throughout history, only to eventually grease the flagpole behind him for a sense of safety and isolation from the plebs of Earth, as he ascends too far into space and freezes into a dwarf star. In an age where we are all basically performers in one way or another, it is one of the most comprehensive, universal allegories for modern life, like what I just described as Twitter. Bardo is an epic poem jazz metal opera which tells an allegory of the artist's death and assumption into divine inspiration. This is the closing song, which concludes a phase of the cycle with the end of the poet's life as he is evaporated at the gates of the beyond.
For helping me along in this beautiful music.
Mark Kozelek, who is, in my ever so humble opinion, the greatest artist of all time, was inspired by the sense of nostalgia and revitalized melancholy brought about by the death of his cousin the summer before to write this song where he tries to put his being into music, and he mightily succeeds.
What's your paradise gotta do with that?
Written Written on his wedding day, Holy Shit is Father John Misty's attempt to give a definition to love and pin comprehension onto his experience by creating a giant list of absurd ordeals and enormous contradictions he feels pressured to resolve all at once. There's a ridiculous contrast between the lush orchestra backing him and his neurotic lyrics and delivery, which are only reconciled at the very end of the song as he poetically makes his way from addressing himself and his dread as a single entity to the same now for him and his wife. Jeff Buckley, Nick Cave, The Brave Little Abacus, Joanna Newsom, Sufjan Stevens, Jeff Mangum, Jandek, Captain Beefheart, Van Dyke Park, Samuel Beckett, James Joyce, The Residents, Zach Hill, Fleet Foxes.
Between me and them.
In the tradition of the never-ending folk ballad, Father John Misty introduces himself to his album about humanity via what's probably the most personal piece of music he's ever made, which says a lot. Over the course of this introspection, more and more layers of persona and excuses are stripped back toward a bare sincerity, all while Gavin Bryars, one of the best minimalist composers of all time, has scored the whole thing to a string ensemble until he reaches a point where the only thing left is to actually make the difficult decision on how to live his life from here on out, and he can't answer it.
Nigga, we the junkies, they the dealers. I be rapping, they be triggered, you be writing. I'm a
JPEG Mafia is an edgy, insecure rapper who uses this song to lay that quite bare in the middle of Veteran, especially in what's shaping up to be the most meaninglessly violent and aggressive song yet. It's jarring to hear the words, "I don't want to be alone." Beyond that, as well, this is the best use to which his skill as the greatest producer ever has been put. Jude Geit always incorporates something extra into his metal albums. Most often, it's microtonal composition, and on this album, there's a little Xenakis too, a little stochastic music, a little acousmatic music. But here we just have a post-rock song that has been crucified. The imagery in this music is of the very concept of hope being splintered and eviscerated at the atomic level. Mama Leak, on this album specifically, are examining the torture of poverty, but they're not writing didactic, heavy-handed lyrics about it. They're performing the soul of the experience under the thumb of capital, and the desperation for relief involved in it. There's an apocalyptic catharsis that comes from inspiration beyond metal and closer to the most unrelenting worlds of jazz and rock music. This is the best song on one of the most unexpected and brilliant hip-hop albums of all time. This song is so individual in the way it expresses itself and the energy it brings from free improvisation and electronic music to establish the identity of the album. This also flows right into Superman That on the album, which keeps up the overwhelming quality of this music for another 3 minutes.
Everything's in transition.
A song about the never-ending cycle of oppression and violence which all life contributes to. The ultimate position of this song is that love songs are the holy byproduct of a humanity cursed with love.
Humiliation is the blueprint of my morals while passers-by all bid on.
Alex Kent, the mastermind behind Sprain and now Shearling, took a step beyond any of the traditions which inspired him by transforming post-rock and avant-garde music into the theater that had always had dormant within it. The last 5 minutes or so of this resemble a theatrical recording, much more than a work of experimental music, and the way the whole thing interacts with the listener works out of a fictive transcendence and into reality, employing anything that it can in order to break through.
Headline said it's southbound.
The closest comparison to this as far as providing a bird's eye view of the continual unforeseen mistakes and flaws that plague human ambition and hope is SDSS 14+13 Zerk on a flagpole sitter. The lyric really central to this disco jam is "I followed my dreams and my dreams said to crawl," which is also the key lyric to the career of Father John Misty as a whole, when viewed as the modern myth he always intended it as. It's possible that this is what subconsciously encouraged me to make these videos, because this is the best song of all time, and it came out last year. Everything I said about God or whatever you call it applies threefold to this one, so good God. This song examines the depths of identity, shame, and temptation through this elaborate mythos based on Kent's childhood in Idaho. It's enormously theatrical and poetic. You could basically look at it as the blueprint for a perfect art form that strips away everything but bare, hard-to-look-at truth.